Good evening, everybody. My name is Nick Spencer. I'm Research Director at Theos, and it's my great pleasure to tell you that there are no fire drills planned for this evening. If you hear one, it's the real thing. Please leave the way you came in. It's my even greater pleasure to welcome you tonight to the 10th Annual Theos Lecture. Theos was launched in November 2006 with the support of the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, although I'm always at pains to emphasise that that was with the warm spiritual support of both archbishops rather than the hard financial support of either of them, and Theos remains independent of any denominational political party. We exist to tell a better story about faith in general and Christianity in particular in contemporary public life. Better in the sense of more accurate, but also, hopefully, in the sense of more interesting and more appealing. We work with the conviction that our common life is an ineradicably ethical endeavour. There is no view from nowhere when it comes to how we live together, and Christian thought and faith have an enormous amount to contribute to that question of how we navigate our shared life. We conduct research, engage with the media, and write books, and I'm pleased to say a number of those are for sale tonight, including, I'm happy to say, a quite brilliantly perceptive study on how politicians have used and abused the parable of the Good Samaritan, the political Samaritan so fresh off the press you're liable to get ink on your fingers. In addition to the books, we publish reports. I want to say a quick word about these. Each of you on your way in should have been given an envelope. In it, there is a letter from Elizabeth, our director, to whom I will hand over in a minute to introduce our speaker, information about the Theos Friends programme, and a Theos report from our back catalogue. Now, you may be wondering why you have received that particular report. You may be thinking that the Theos team has carefully selected for you the report that we believe best matches your particular interests and spiritual passions. You would be wrong. The distribution of Theos reports tonight is completely random, but there is order underneath the randomness. This being an audience crammed full of Theos junkies and supporters, there's a good chance you will have read the report you've been given. Alternatively, if you haven't, there is an admittedly very small chance that you don't actually want to read the report you've been given. Either way, we would very much like it if, during the drinks and canopies downstairs, to which you are warmly invited after the lecture and discussion, you took the opportunity to chat to someone you didn't know, compare reports that you've been given, and perhaps swap a report for one that you find more appealing. That way you get to break the ice, meet and talk with somebody you don't know, and walk away with the Theos report of your dreams. Let no one say we don't think relationally at Theos. Our reports and publications are the foundation of our work, but the high point is our annual lecture, of which, as I've mentioned, this is the 10th. Our very first, in 2008, was with Mark Thompson, who was then Director General of the BBC, who gave an extremely thoughtful and carefully articulated lecture, which ended up on the front page of the Daily Star 2 days later. Since then, we have had many eminent lecturers and many fascinating lectures, but none of them have yet managed to capture the front page of the Star. Tim, the gauntlet is laid down for you. Over the last 4 years, we have been hugely grateful to be working in partnership with CCLA. For those of you who don't know them, CCLA is one of the UK's largest charity fund managers, having been established to serve the interests of mission-driven organisations that were not well served by the financial services industry. Today, CCLA has 40,000 church, charity and public sector clients. It provides the secretariat for the Church Investors Group, which represents the institutional investors of many mainstream church denominations, and it's ranked top manager of social and responsible investment funds in the UK. Overall, CCA has a very strong reputation for its long experience of stewardship and of ethics, and of really walking the talk themselves when it comes to the management of funds. And so we are genuinely delighted and very grateful to be working with them again for this annual lecture. In advance of the lecture, I was chatting with one of our friends from CCLA, and he happened to mention that when they started partnering with Theos on the annual lecture 4 years ago, they managed around £5 billion for charities, churches and faith groups. Today, that is around £8 billion. If anybody here tonight still has any lingering doubts about the enormous benefits of partnering with Theos, please speak to somebody from CCLA. Tonight's event is being filmed for the BBC and also live streamed and recording, and we will be taking photographs after the event as well. During the Q&A, if you don't want to be on telly or on live stream, it's probably best not to answer a question, and if you have any problems about being photographed later, please do speak to one of the members of the staff. If you're into tweeting, the hashtag for tonight is #Theos Farron. I'm now going to hand over to Elizabeth Oldfield, our director, who's going to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Good evening. Well, this will be brief because our annual lecture tonight needs a little introduction. I am really delighted to welcome Tim Farron. Tim was born in Lancashire. He studied at Newcastle University and he went on to work in academia. Since 2005, he has been MP for Westmorland and Lonsdale. And from 2015 until June of this year, he was the leader of the Liberal Democrats. One small note is that, as some of you know, the debate on the budget is happening tonight and there will be a vote later. It shouldn't happen, but there is a small chance that Tim might need to exit stage right, left, and I wanted to warn you, just in case that happens, that he's not scarpering away from a robust debate, but he's needed in the Commons. So while we have him, Tim Farron.
More importantly, this clashes with Blackburn Rovers versus Blackpool. I've got my phone on airplane mode, really not for your convenience, but to stop me being tempted. Well, look, in the 1980s, there was an indie band called Pop Will Eat Itself. And the name of the band is a fascinating hypothesis, and one for a different lecture to a different think tank. And one indeed that I would absolutely love to give, by the way. But my hypothesis this evening is that in this country and across the world, liberalism will eat itself, is eating itself, may already have eaten itself. Why? Because if you say you favour diversity, pluralism, then you must oppose all attempts at assimilation and forced conformity. You may like the idea that people will think the same as you, but you must not aim to build a society where you engineer that either via legal or social pressure. And it is especially on this latter point that liberalism is at risk. John Stuart Mill is the father of modern liberalism. He spoke of many threats to liberty. Amongst the greatest that he identified is the tyranny of opinion. In his most famous book on liberty, he says the following: in this age, the mere example of non-conformity, the mere refusal to bend the knee to custom, is itself a service, precisely because the tyranny of opinion is such as to make eccentricity a reproach. It is desirable, in order to break through that tyranny, that people should be eccentric. Eccentricity has always abounded, and the amount of eccentricity in a society has generally been proportional to the amount of genius, mental vigour, and moral courage which it contained. That so few now dare to be eccentric marks the chief danger of the time. Written in 1859, spine-tinglingly relevant in 2017. Now, Mill says that the quality of our ideas and of our society is enhanced by free expression of competing world views. Society is stale without that. He is clear that our liberty is at risk when we all feel a pressure to start thinking the same things. Even more at risk when it is the express intention of those who hold those views to encourage this universal assimilation. Social media feeds this. Maybe 10 years ago we thought social media would lead to a greater democracy. greater individual empowerment, the flowering of thousands of unmediated, unfiltered, unspun viewpoints and opinions. But how naive does that sound today? Social media now
appears to fuel groupthink, pack mentality, and depressing conformity, not to mention a disgraceful lack of civility and decency. The tyrants of opinion have their secret police behind millions of keyboards. Christians have more reason than most to be alarmed. Christianity also has a history which gives us a clue as to where this may be heading. When I was a young Christian at university, there was a challenge we used to hear at Christian Union meetings. It went like this: if it was against the law to be a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? It's a good challenge. We're told as Christians not to be ashamed of Christ, not to do a Peter and disown him, or a Judas and discard him. We're told not to hide our light, to live and speak in ways that will draw people to ask us about our faith. And then we are told that we should always be ready with an answer for anyone who asks us for the reason for the hope that we have. In other words, live openly as a Christian and seek to share the gospel when you can, because the Bible makes it crystal clear that it is a matter of eternal life and death. It's a good challenge, but of course in reality, it is not against the law to be a Christian. On Sunday, I go to church with my family. I do so freely. My pastor preaches faithfully from the Bible without compromising or watering it down, and he does so freely. I'm open about being a Christian. I serve in the British Parliament as such, with no threat to my liberty. If anyone tries to threaten my life or liberty for seeking to live as a Christian, I can count on the state to protect me. If you want to live freely as a Christian, you would struggle to find a country as committed to your liberty as this one. Christians who complain about a loss of liberty need to start by acknowledging that reality and being grateful for it. So let me be clear right now. I do acknowledge it and I am grateful. But genuine Christianity has always been counter-cultural. It will always go against the norms of the day. In the book of Revelation, chapter 17, we read about the future final fall of Babylon. Babylon, materialistic, complacent, ambivalent towards the poor and vulnerable, self-satisfied and proud. Revelation was written by John in about 90 AD. The Babylonian Empire had been dead for hundreds of years. So why mention it at that point? Well, because Babylon stands for every empire, every society where human beings choose to live for themselves and not for God. So Babylon in 90 AD was Rome, and today, well, it does. It's this. It's our society. And as Christians, we are to live as aliens in such a land. Why? Well, because the first commandment is this: I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. So, your God shall not be your money or your career, your opinion of yourself, your sex life, your image, your identity, your comfort, your holidays, your friends, your family, your possessions, your life. To be a Christian is to deny yourself and follow Christ. So Christianity rubs against every earthly culture. It is meant to. You should be a decent, good-mannered citizen in Babylon, but you should never feel at home. You are to be a resident alien. Now, 5 minutes on social media will give you a window into a society which condemns and judges, that leaps to take offence and pounces to cause it. Liberals condemning those who don't conform as nasty and hateful, the right condemning liberals as fragile snowflakes, but Christianity rebukes both sides. Don't judge. Show kindness, show gentleness, show patience, especially to those who don't deserve it. And 5 minutes in the high street, especially now in the run-up to Christmas, will show you a society hooked on materialism. 5 minutes eavesdropping in the cafes or looking at Facebook updates will show you a society hooked on individual achievement, on the achievement of your children, a society hooked on self-worth and pride. Christianity tells you that everything and everyone you have in your life is a temporary gift from God, and we should worship the giver and not the things that have been given. 5 minutes surfing TV channels will show you a society hooked on self-esteem and self-worth, living to be true to ourselves. Christianity says that you are worth a vast amount to the God of the universe, but that you must humble yourself before him and live for him and others and not for yourself. Christianity is deeply counter-cultural. It offends us because it tells us that we are not our own, that we belong to God. It tells us that we are not good, that our biggest need is not food, water, money, relationships, success, or acceptance by society. Our greatest need is forgiveness from the God who made us. Christianity is a two-fingered salute to your ego. So what earthly help can this counter-cultural belief system call upon as it battles against inevitable disdain? Well, the answer is simple. The answer is liberalism. Now, British liberalism is founded in the battle for religious liberty. The non-conformist evangelical Christian groups that were persecuted by a society which favoured adherence only to the established church. They built a liberal movement that championed much wider liberty for women, for other religious minorities, non-religious minorities, for cultural and regional minorities, for the poor and vulnerable. I think liberalism is better than conservatism because it doesn't accept the status quo, the absence of freedom for the sake of tradition and the convenience of the powerful. Instead, liberalism asks tough questions and doesn't accept glib answers. I think liberalism is better than socialism because liberalism dictates that we must all be free, but that we must not all be the same. Liberalism has apparently won. Even members of the Conservative and Labour parties now describe themselves as liberals. And let's be honest, you can't work in the media these days without being a liberal. Even most of the journalists who write for the right-wing press are secretly liberals. Despite my best efforts, the Liberal Democrats have not won. Irrespective of my efforts, liberalism has. Now, in the 4th century, in Rome, Christianity won, in that it became the establishment worldview. Up to that point, there had been 300 years of persecution and exclusion for the followers of Jesus Christ. Christianity was an emancipationist doctrine at that time. It then became adopted as the official religion of the empire, and within a few years, it goes from being emancipationist to, at the centre of the empire at least, being oppressive in its worst forms. But the church morphed from persecuted to dominant in a short time, and in doing so, it lost sight of its own internal truth, of reliance on Christ alone and self-sacrificing love. The state with which that church merged began to oppress different minorities, to show the same intolerance and violence towards other groups that Christians had endured for so many years. I fear that liberalism faces the same fate today. Now, although I am giving this year's Theos Lecture, I don't want to make it all about me. But the truth is that I am an uncomfortable case study. I suspect that this is why you invited me. So I am a liberal to my fingertips. I'm not pretending to be a liberal. I didn't become a liberal as a cunning career move or to impress a girl or to boost my social standing. I joined the Liberals when I was 16 because I'm a liberal, funnily enough. I believe in the equal worth and value of every person. I believe that every person should be free to live as they see fit, to hold their beliefs, their conscience, their worldview, and to express them as they wish. I reject forced conformity, whether that comes from the law or from social pressure. Now, as Liberal Democrat leader, I spent much of the time that I should have been using to set out the party's case, batting away questions to do with my faith. Yes, we see how you voted, Mr. Farron, and we hear what you say, but what do you think? Well, as a Christian, I hold to the Bible's teaching. I also hold to my liberalism, to the need to treat every person as equally valuable and equally deserving of freedom. That's John Stuart Mill's liberalism. That is Gladstone's liberalism. It's Hobhouse's liberalism. It's Grimond's liberalism. And you look through history, where the gospel is preached, other freedoms follow. The abolition of slavery, led by evangelical Christians most notably, Wilberforce. The laws to prevent industrial exploitation, led by committed Christian Lord Shaftesbury. The ending of the cruel practice of sati in India after campaigning by Christian missionaries, especially William Carey. Now, this is not a coincidence. If you believe that you have been saved by grace, by a God who commands that you show that same selfless love to others, if you believe that God created every person of equal value and dignity and in his own image, and if you believe that you are answerable to that God, then that belief will not leave you unmoved. That belief will define your values and it will define your actions. Christianity, then, is the essential underpinning of liberalism and, indeed, of democracy. Now, if our values are relativistic, if they are shifting, if they depend upon the temporary norms of this age, then the freedoms you bank upon today cannot be guaranteed tomorrow. Our liberties are in the hands, then, of unstable forces. We cannot have confidence that our rights will still be our rights from one generation to the next, because we cannot call upon any authority in support of those rights. Christianity, then, provides the values that permit liberalism to flourish. In discarding Christianity, we kick away the foundations of liberalism and democracy. And so we cannot then be surprised when what we call liberalism stops being liberal. My experience is that although liberalism has won, it is now behaving like the established church of the empire in the 4th and 5th centuries. It has gained ascendancy and lost itself in the process. It isn't very liberal anymore. So many who declare themselves to be liberals really aren't, and John Stuart Mill may be spinning in his grave. Now, some criticise Mill, especially at the time, saying that because he wasn't especially religious, that his thinking didn't account for those who have convictions that drive them to believe that there is ultimate truth and that they therefore have a duty to impose those truths on society. Now, that is a view that some conservative philosophers have used to dismiss Mill's liberalism. And it's actually an assumption that is at the core of the questions I received, especially during the election, from people who would be absolutely appalled to be bracketed with right-wing Victorian philosophers. Now, I believe in God. I believe that Jesus is his long-promised Christ or Messiah, that Jesus, and when Jesus says that all who believe in him shall not perish but have eternal life, and that he is the only way to the Father, I believe him. I share God's wish that everyone would come to believe this. It breaks my heart that people don't. But God hasn't created us as robots. We have real choices. You and I matter, and every human being is accountable. The decisions we make are real decisions. He allows us to reject him, and so who am I to disagree with that? Edmund Burke said then that all the laws against the godless have not saved one single soul. To put it another way, what is the point in legislating to make people who are not Christians behave as though they were? It isn't liberal, it is counterproductive, and it does not follow the Bible's teaching. One of the most famous stories that Jesus told, and about his life I should say, is recorded in Luke 19. Zacchaeus is a tax collector. In that society, that would have made him a collaborator and an extortionist. More unpopular than politicians and journalists combined. Zacchaeus worshipped the god of materialism, but Zacchaeus is interested in Jesus. He's not a tall man, so he climbs a tree to get a glimpse of Jesus as he goes by. And Jesus spies him out and invites himself to Zacchaeus' house. Zacchaeus is delighted. You see, Jesus doesn't push him away because of his wrongdoing. He accepts him as he is, but he doesn't expect him to stay as he is. Zacchaeus' response is to seek then to put right what he has done wrong, to offer to repay fourfold anybody he has cheated, and to give away half his possessions to the poor. And you see, that is the biblical pattern. You come to Jesus in your wretched state. You don't contribute to your forgiveness or salvation one jot. You receive that forgiveness, and then you must go and turn away from your previous life. Deny yourself and seek to follow Christ and his teaching. You don't have to clean yourself up first. You don't have to be good for a bit and then try applying to become a Christian to see if you've made the grade. The point is that none of us has made the grade. But that is okay, because Jesus has. He chose to die in your place. And that passage also reminds us of two really important biblical truths. One, that we're all equal under God, and we must not judge others, or else we bring judgment upon ourselves. And two, God will judge. He is not indifferent to our choices. It is not unloving or judgmental for Christians, then, to point that out. But making people live as Christians when they aren't is unwise, ungodly, counterproductive, and illiberal. As a liberal, I say it is wrong, and as a Christian, I say it's wrong and it doesn't even work. To believe in the Bible's teaching and to also believe in people's right to reject it and to live as they choose is about as close to a pure application of liberalism as you can get. And yet, so many people who count themselves as liberals can't or won't grasp this. In part, this is down to the growth of religious illiteracy in many parts of our society, but that is not a good enough excuse. So the questions came to me thick and fast during those 7 weeks of the general election campaign. Mostly, they went along the lines of, but how can you believe what the Bible says and lead a liberal party? Answer, easy. You just need to be a liberal. That people ask that question makes me seriously doubt that they understand liberalism even though they may preach it. Liberalism has eaten itself. So when Jacob Rees-Mogg declares his views on the application of faith, he gets mocked, but no one is surprised or confused. He is a traditional social conservative. Of course he believes those things, or so the thinking goes. When a liberal turns out to be an evangelical Christian, people are surprised and confused. If you are one of those who are surprised or confused, then you are a victim of the triumph of liberalism, where the main loser is liberalism. Now let me be very clear. I handle loads of the questions I got during the campaign badly. I sometimes demonstrated a lack of wisdom, so please don't think I see myself as any kind of noble victim. Now, I took on the leadership of the Liberal Democrats at the lowest point in our history. It was like becoming manager of a newly relegated football club. The board, the players and the fans were shell-shocked and devastated. I had absolutely no transfer kitty. You might, if you were being generous, say that I avoided further relegation, prevented us plunging through the divisions, stopped the rot, gave us some self-purpose and belief, and increased the attendances. And what I would say with Witney, Richmond Park and the local election results, you could say that I had an impressive and morale-boosting FA Cup run. But it would all, which, as is often the case, ended in naught. It would also be fair to say that immediate promotion back to the Premier League is not an achievement I managed to deliver. What is certain is that following our annihilation in 2015, after the coalition years, I was the first Liberal leader in history to lead a party that wasn't even the third party in British politics. Now that meant that every second of media exposure I got was precious. And every second spent batting away theological questions was a second wasted. So I could have given bigger, better answers, but that would have eaten up even more time. And anyway, I was running to be Prime Minister, not Pope. But I realised that my lot would be either, going forward, to compromise my faith and say easy things to fit in with current secular thinking, or else to continue to be the party's main spokesperson, but incapable of getting the message across because of all those questions. So I knew that stepping down was the only thing to do. I was right to do it. I don't regret it. It now gives me the chance to challenge the tyranny of opinion, to seek to redeem liberalism. Now, John Stuart Mill talks of the value of eccentricity. using the word in the sense that it would have been understood in the mid-19th century. Eccentricity meaning to be off-centre, not the norm. But let's use it in its current sense. Eccentricity meaning something wacky, peculiar, probably ridiculous, but essentially harmless. Now, my observation is that for many years now, our culture has considered that the absence of faith is the neutral position, and that the holding of a religious faith is eccentric. In other words, an absence of faith is the standard assumption around which we build our social structures, and if you have a faith, we will consider you to be eccentric in the wacky and harmless sense, so we will tolerate you so long as you remain on the edges. But what appears now to be happening is that while the absence of faith is still thought to be the neutral position, holding a faith is only considered to be tolerably eccentric if it is merely cultural. But if your faith actually affects your worldview in any way that puts it at odds with the mainstream, then your faith is considered to be malign and intolerable. Now, I want to first say that this viewpoint is not only very clearly prevalent, but staggeringly arrogant and obviously wrong. There is absolutely no such thing as neutrality. The godless worldview is no more nor less valid than one that trusts, for example, in the God of the Bible. Every human being has a worldview. You will acquire that worldview in different ways and from different sources. Maybe you get it fully or in part from a book that you consider to be holy, or from your parents, or from your peer group, your teachers, the media, or the culture in which you are immersed. You can't, on the one hand, think that Trump or Brexit were aided by fake news and troll factories in St. Petersburg, and then on the other hand, believe that you have total control and critical independence over every notion or viewpoint that you hold, not without being conceited in the extreme. So there is no neutrality. Absence of faith is a valid worldview, but it has no right to supremacy. If you believe it does have that right, then I respect your view, but you are not a liberal. I have often been encouraged by well-meaning people to make sure that my faith doesn't influence my decisions or actions as a politician. The more I think about it, the more daft that sounds. Do you leave your worldview at the door before you enter a room? Do you enter every situation empty-headed and value-free? No, neither do I, and neither will I. I believe in pluralism. I'm not a secularist, but I believe in a secular society where there is no state faith. That in Britain, we have a church trapped as part of the furniture of the state is a waste of a church. A boat in the water is good, water in the boat is bad. A church in the state is good, the state in the church is bad, really bad. It pollutes the message of the church, it compromises it, weakens its witness. And let's be clear, it is just as illiberal and just as silly to make atheism the state religion. But the threat to liberalism is far greater than faith being relegated in social standing below the absence of faith. If you actively hold a faith that is more than an expression of cultural identity, a faith that forms the centre of your world view, you are deemed to be far worse than eccentric. You are dangerous. You are offensive. And here we have the great issue. We live in a time of identities. People don't choose to do things, they are things. So to challenge an identity is to commit a personal assault. The rise of nationalism in this country and others is a case in point. We have, in an extremely short time, found ourselves in a situation where it is considered that causing offence is to commit violence. What is at the heart of a liberal society? It is to uphold that we have a right to offend and a duty to tolerate offence. George Orwell said, "If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear." But as Christians, we also have a duty and the desire to be kind and gentle. Now, where have I heard that before? So be bold in saying things that may cause offence, but do not be offensive. Jesus is your example. How calmly he speaks, and with such grace, with such respect for the people he speaks to. What patience he shows to people who reject him. How meekly he subjects himself to their violence, and how clearly he speaks in ways that wither. That expose hypocrisy, that exposes lies, that exposes truth. He launches ferocious verbal assaults on the Pharisees. He calls them hypocrites, a brood of vipers, whitewashed tombs. In other words, clean and attractive on the outside and full of rotting corpses on the inside. And he spends time with outcasts, loves the unlovable, heals the hopeless, opens up the kingdom of God to those who don't deserve it, but who nevertheless seek it and shall therefore receive it. Jesus was full of grace and truth. Crucified truth oppresses nobody, but it weighs heavily upon us when we consider it. And amongst other things, it is the raw fuel for liberalism. Because if Jesus died for me, then he also died for you. And that means you must matter. You must really, really matter. So if we relegate Christianity, then we hollow out liberalism. Liberalism has eaten itself because it has eaten the very worldview that gave birth to it, that made it possible, that makes it possible. It is a little bit like Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future, erasing himself by accidentally preventing his parents getting together. So let's bring liberalism back to life. Let's start by saying something gently, but which may cause offence. Let's just see where it gets us. It's this. We don't really have shared values. There is no unifying set of British values. It is a myth. We are fooling ourselves. As a Christian, of course, I think there are common values to all humankind. We see them in the commandments, and in one sense, we don't need to be told them because we know instinctively what is wrong and what is right. It's one of the key proofs that God exists. But are there common secular values that we collectively hold here in Britain? No, I don't think so. Our values are diverse, atomised, and not fully shared at all. Not even within our own towns or our own families. And don't be surprised about this. Secularism is a totalising creed that reduces everyone down to either consumer or regulatory units. It speaks the language of equality and diversity, but it doesn't do it. We've been atomised. So let me quote from the book of Judges. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Everyone did as they saw fit. If we have no king, no unifying code, then we will make it up as we go along. Values are a relativistic mist that come and go. What is true for you may be true for me, or it may not. And it might all change tomorrow. There is such a thing as society, but it's like a ship with neither an anchor nor a rudder. Just a load of people running around on deck, following a few loud voices that sound temporarily convincing. Meanwhile, the boat heads in any old direction. So I am a liberal in economic terms. I'm a moderate social democrat. I believe climate change is real and I want to stop it. I'm a patriotic Englishman, but I'm also a passionate European and internationalist. I'm a Bible-believing Christian who seeks to live obediently to God and who actively supports the freedom of everyone to either accept or reject that. That sums up my values. Are we seriously saying that they are shared by the majority of the British people? Now, people talk about shared values today. I've done it myself. But what they mean when they say so is that these are my values and I'm going to act as though they were yours. And I will demonstrate contempt for you if you depart from them. It's time to be honest with each other. We do not have shared values, and the assumption that we do is dangerous. The phrase the liberal elite is usually bandied about by people who aren't liberal, but who are the elite. Whereas I am a liberal are not part of the elite. But the cultural leaders of our day have made the arrogant and fatal assumption that we have these shared values and have sought to enforce them via Mill's hated tyranny of opinion. And the consequences are, well, Trump and Brexit, to name just two. Because every tyrant feeds and inspires the resistance that threatens to overthrow them as a result of their own arrogance. The hand-wringing elite in our politics, media, education and business are as guilty of creating the reactionary politics of populism as Murdoch and Dacre. Why? Because they assumed everyone thought the same and dismissed with ridicule and contempt any sign of eccentricity. Now, I am sometimes asked, what should a Christian be doing in politics? Should a Christian even be involved in politics at all? Well, the 5th century monk, Simeon Stylites, was so determined to keep away from being corrupted by the world that he lived 37 years of his life on the top of a pole in Aleppo. I was told about this at primary school, and my teacher, Mrs. Deakin, was keen to explain that this was an example of a hermit seeking to separate himself from society, whereas we were all just keen to know how exactly the guy went to the toilet. And I still don't know the answer to that question. Yes, I mean, all I would say is this. I mean, either way, Stylites got it wrong. As Christians, we're told not to be of the world, but to be in it. So I shall not be following Stylites' example. My aim now, going forward, is to be the best MP anyone has ever known for their constituency, to live out my faith by loving my enemies, displaying grace and gentleness, serving those who I represent, and being a voice in Parliament for those who are the least powerful. And sometimes it will involve taking the opportunity to give a reason for the hope that I have. You see, I am a liberal, reasonably intelligent bloke, brought up in a secular society in a family that mostly didn't embrace an active religious faith. I knew people who were Christians, but I prided myself on being far too strong-minded to fall for all that religious nonsense. So how does a reasonably intelligent, modern liberal bloke end up believing in Jesus Christ? Well, look, atheism is not the absence of belief. It is a belief in absence, and therefore the absence of common values. It is a belief in there being no unifying truth. But if there is no unifying truth, then by its own standard, the belief that there is no unifying truth must also be bogus. If you declare that there is no unifying truth, then it stands to reason that that declaration isn't true either. Ergo, atheism doesn't exist. And I refuse to believe in something that doesn't exist. In short, it occurred to me that Christianity is true. The claims that Christ makes are so direct and so clear that we can't pretend that Christianity is just a nice philosophy. It's either horribly wrong or life-changingly right. Its claims to ultimate truth are insistent and deliberate. Those New Testament documents are written so soon after the events, by so many eyewitnesses, and with astonishingly early copies of those original eyewitness accounts that testify to their validity and reliability, that drawing the conclusion that it's all a myth seemed to me to fly in the face of all the evidence. So I concluded that it's certainly not a myth. It might be a hoax, but it's probably true. And if it's true, I had to make a choice. Accept or reject. By the grace of God, I accepted. So look, this isn't an evangelistic talk, but I'd want to persuade you that it is rational and reasonable to take Christianity seriously. I also want the freedom to be able to commend Christianity as the best foundation for a plural and liberal society. A foundation that holds to objective truths about what a flourishing human life is, but one that holds those objective truths with generosity, grace, respect, and love. But I know that to allow people more gifted than me the opportunity to get the message of Christianity across, we need a society that permits this to happen, that is open-minded and prepared to accept the potential truth of all belief systems, to test them, to see if they are true. That's the heart of what Mill is getting at. No idea should be stifled, and that includes being stifled by social conventions, by shaming its adherence, by intolerance towards difference. If people aren't able to choose to deny themselves, to instead live as they see fit, then we are not a liberal society. If people who believe that Jesus of Nazareth is exactly who he says he is, if they're excluded, then we aren't a liberal society. If people with differing worldviews cannot serve together with mutual respect, we are not a liberal society. Any self-interested person can fight for their own liberty or for the advancement of their own worldview. That does not make you a liberal one little bit. Fighting for the rights and liberties of others and for the space for a worldview that you do not accept, that is what makes you a liberal. I continue to seek to be a consistent liberal. But finally, if I cannot appeal to your liberalism, can I at least appeal to a bit of empirical common sense? So today, we look back on the 1950s and the 1970s, to name but two, and we laugh and we sneer. Such naivety, such backwardness. But if those societies were able to look forward at us, they'd be shocked and appalled by our take on what counts as right and wrong. Can I also assure you then that the Britain of 2070 will look back at this generation and laugh at us and be contemptuous of us? I do not know on what basis or which features will be especially seen as unacceptable or ridiculous, but we can be absolutely certain that we will be mocked and derided by our great-grandchildren's generation. What's my point here? It's just that we are fools if we slip into what C.S. Lewis referred to as the snobbery of chronology, of lacking self-awareness to the extent that we arrogantly assume that our era, our generation, is comprehensively, morally and culturally superior to those who've gone before. In other words, you must surely accept the possibility that your worldview might, just might, be wrong. So, hold it with humility and tolerate those whom you find intolerable. Stand full square behind those whom you find offensive. Accept with grace the offence you may feel in the knowledge that you are earning the right to respectfully cause offence to those who look at the world quite differently to you. If you are a Christian, then crave pure, pluralistic liberalism. If you are a liberal, don't be one whose liberalism eats itself, leaving nothing more than a respectable tyranny. Thank you.